Copy. The letter came on a Wednesday. Certified mail, signature required, the kind that the carrier hands across the porch with the clipboard already turned around. Helen signed her name on the line, said thank you, and carried the envelope into the kitchen before she opened it. She read the first paragraph twice to make sure she had read it correctly. Pursuant to Note Reference 4427-B, the undersigned institution gives formal notice of an outstanding principal obligation in the amount of $147,218 secured against the property described in Exhibit A. The obligation matures in 30 days from the date of this notice, after which foreclosure proceedings will commence on the secured property in its entirety, including all improvements and adjacent parcels held under common deed. Helen Marie Latham was 69 years old. She had been the sole owner of the property in question, 320 acres in Polk County, Tennessee, the eastern slope of the Cherokee National Forest pressing up against her back fence line, for 31 years. She had not borrowed money against that land from any institution since 1994. She read the letter a third time. Then she folded it in half. Then she set it on the kitchen table next to the salt shaker and the morning's coffee cup, and she walked outside without her coat on in early November, and she stood on the porch for almost 10 minutes looking at the maples on the ridge. That was the kind of woman she was. She did not call her daughter. She did not call a lawyer. She walked back inside, refilled her coffee, sat down at the table, and read the letter a fourth time. Then she went to the bedroom closet, knelt down, and pulled out the cedar trunk Robert had built for her in 1979. Her husband had been dead for 36 years. Helen had grown up in McMinn County, the daughter of a sawmill foreman and a woman who took in laundry. Her father died when she was 14 and her mother 3 years later, and Helen had finished high school living with an aunt who never quite forgave her for being there. She started working at a feed store in Athens at 17 for 42 cents an hour. She met Robert Latham in 1973 at a church social in Etowah. He was a long-haul mechanic, 2 years older, with a quiet way of standing at the edge of a room without saying much. They married in 1974. They had nothing to start with. Robert worked nights at the truck terminal in Cleveland, and Helen kept the books for the feed store during the day. They lived in a rented trailer outside Benton for the first 6 years of their marriage. By 1980, they had saved $9,400. They put $6,000 of it down on a 40-acre parcel up against the National Forest that nobody else wanted because the access road washed out every other spring. They built the house themselves over 2 summers, Helen carrying the boards up the slope on her shoulder when Robert was on the road. Their daughter Rebecca was born in 1983. Robert died in a highway accident outside Knoxville on the morning of February 4th, 1989. He was 38 years old. Rebecca was 5. Helen was 33. There had been a small insurance settlement, $11,000. Helen used $4,000 of it to pay off the remaining note on the original 40 acres and put the rest in the bank. Then she went to work. She bought the next 80 acres in 1991 with money she had saved from running a small bookkeeping practice out of the kitchen. She bought the next 60 in 1996, and the final 140 in 2003, parcel by parcel, from neighbors who were giving up or dying off. She paid cash for every acre after the first one. She had not held a mortgage on any of it since the original note was retired in 1989. She had also kept a diary. She had started the diary 3 weeks after Robert was buried, sitting at the kitchen table in the same chair she still sat in, writing in a hardcover ledger book she had bought at the Western Auto in Etowah for $2.10. It was not a sentimental diary. It was a record. Every dollar that came in, every dollar that went out, every visitor to the property, every phone call about the land, every letter received and every letter sent, every conversation with the bank, the date, the time, the name of the person on the other end, what was said, what was promised, what was confirmed in writing afterward. She had filled 14 ledger books over 36 years. They were stacked in the cedar trunk, in order, with the year written on the spine of each one in her own hand. The reason she had started keeping them was a man named Donald Pruitt. Donald Pruitt had been the loan officer at Eastland State Bank in Etowah in 1989. He had been the man Helen sat across from 3 weeks after the funeral, when the bank had called her in to discuss what they called The situation. Robert had taken out a personal loan against the truck 6 months before he died. $8,000, signature loan, no collateral against the land. Donald Pruitt had told Helen, looking her in the eye across his desk, that the bank was prepared to be very flexible, given the circumstances, but that there were some additional papers she would need to sign. The papers Donald Pruitt put in front of Helen Latham that afternoon would have placed a secondary lien against the 40 acres of the original homestead. He told her it was a formality. He told her it was the bank's standard procedure for any outstanding obligation when the primary debtor had passed. He had her name typed at the bottom of the form already. Helen had not signed. She had told Donald Pruitt that she would pay the $8,000 in full within 90 days, and she had walked out. She had paid the $8,000 in full within 63 days from the insurance settlement, with a cashier's check delivered in person and a signed receipt obtained before she left the bank lobby. That receipt was on the first page of the first ledger book in the cedar trunk. Helen had not trusted a bank in 36 years. She drove into town the morning after the certified letter arrived and went to the office of a lawyer named James Holloway, who had handled the small estate work after Robert's death and who was still practicing at 72, 2 days a week. She showed him the letter. He read it twice. He set it down, folded his hands on his desk, and said, "Helen, I have to tell you, I don't see how this is possible. But the note number they're citing is real. I've seen that format before. It's an Eastland note from the 80s. I'd need to see what they've got." Helen said, "Whatever they've got, it isn't real." He said, "I believe you, but the law doesn't run on what we believe." Holloway called the bank. The bank now went by a different name. Eastland State had been absorbed by a regional holding company in 2011, which had been absorbed by a national institution in 2019. But the underlying records had traveled with the acquisitions. The bank's response came back through their counsel, a corporate attorney out of Nashville named Marcus Brennan. Brennan was 46 years old, a graduate of Vanderbilt Law School, and he had been hired by the holding company specifically to handle what the firm's website called legacy portfolio resolution. He had been doing it for 9 years. Brennan sent over a copy of the note. It was real. Signature line dated April 17, 1989. Borrower listed as Helen M. Latham. Principal, $86,000. Secured against the original 40-acre homestead with a cross-collateralization clause extending to all subsequently acquired contiguous parcels held under common ownership. Helen looked at the signature line. Then she looked at it again. Then she said to Holloway, "I never signed that." Holloway said, "It does look like your signature." Helen said, "It looks like the signature on the page Donald Pruitt put in front of me in March of 1989, the one I did not sign." Holloway was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Helen, if you can prove that, what you just said, I think we have a case. But the burden is going to be on you, and it's been 36 years. Helen said, "I can prove it." She brought the cedar trunk into his office the next morning. The trunk was 3.5 feet long, cedar with iron hinges, and Robert had built it for her in the winter of 1979 when they were still living in the rented trailer outside Benton. It weighed 61 pounds empty and considerably more full. Helen had carried it from her truck to Holloway's office herself, refusing the help of the receptionist, the way she had refused help with a great many things over 36 years. She set it on the carpet in front of Holloway's desk. She knelt down beside it and unlatched the lid the way a person might unlatch the lid on something they had not opened in a long time, slowly with both hands. The hinges made a small sound. The smell of cedar came up out of the trunk and into the office. The 14 ledger books were stacked inside, each one with the year written on the spine in Helen's clear, square handwriting. The first one on the bottom said 1989. The most recent on top said 2025. She lifted them out one at a time and set them on Holloway's desk in chronological order. It took her almost 2 minutes. When she was done, the stack on the desk was over a foot high. She opened the first one to the entry for March 14th, 1989, and turned it around so Holloway could read it. 3:15 p.m., Eastland State Bank, Etowah Branch. Meeting with Donald Pruitt, loan officer. Present, D. Pruitt, H. Latham. Topic: outstanding personal loan of Robert Latham, signature only, $8,000 principal. D. Pruitt presented a secondary collateralization document drawn against the 40-acre homestead. I declined to sign. I committed to repayment in full within 90 days, in cash, no lien. D. Pruitt acknowledged this commitment verbally. I left the meeting at 4:02 p.m. with the unsigned document in my possession, which I have retained. The unsigned document was clipped to the page. It was on Eastland State Bank letterhead, dated March 14, 1989, with Helen's name typed at the bottom and the signature line blank. The note Brennan had produced, the one dated April 17, 1989, with a signature on it, was on identical letterhead. Same form number, same template. Holloway looked at the unsigned document. He looked at the diary entry. He looked at Helen. He said, "Mrs. Latham, we are going to federal court." The case was filed 11 weeks later in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Tennessee, sitting in Chattanooga. Marcus Brennan represented the bank with 2 associates and a paralegal. James Holloway represented Helen Latham alone, with a banker's box on the table beside him containing all 14 ledger books and the unsigned 1989 document. The judge was the Honorable Ellis Whitcomb, 64 years old, 22 years on the federal bench, known throughout the Sixth Circuit for reading every document submitted to him personally before any hearing. The hearing was on a Tuesday in February. Helen wore the same blue dress she had worn to her husband's funeral 36 years earlier. Her daughter Rebecca, now 42, sat in the second row behind her. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, American flag in the corner, cold air through the vents. The room held maybe 40 people, and there were 6. Marcus Brennan opened. He spoke for 19 minutes. He cited the note. He cited the cross-collateralization clause. He cited the chain of custody through 3 corporate acquisitions. He referred to Helen's diary dismissively as a personal artifact of no evidentiary weight in a matter of secured commercial obligation. He used the phrase legacy artifact twice. He used the phrase the institution's records are clear 3 times. When he was finished, James Holloway stood up. He said 3 sentences. "Your Honor, the bank has produced a note dated April 17, 1989. My client has produced a contemporaneous record from March 14, 1989, in which the same bank attempted to obtain her signature on a substantially similar document and was refused. The unsigned document is in evidence as Exhibit 3. He sat down. Judge Whitcomb did not say anything for a long moment. Then he picked up Exhibit 3. He read it. He picked up Exhibit 4, which was the photocopy of the note Brennan had produced. He laid them side by side on the bench in front of him. He read the letterheads. He read the form numbers. He read the body of each document. He looked at the signature on Exhibit 4 for a very long time. Then he picked up Exhibit 5, which was the ledger book open to the March 14, 1989 entry, and he read that too. He read it twice. He read it slowly the second time. He turned the page once, looked at the next entry, and turned back. He read the date on the unsigned document. He read the date on the ledger entry. He set them down beside the bank's note, the 3 pages now arranged in front of him in the order of their creation. The courtroom went silent. The kind of silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier than sound. Marcus Brennan looked at his associate. The associate looked at the table. The paralegal behind them stopped writing. Helen Latham sat with her hands folded in her lap and did not move. Rebecca behind her watched the back of her mother's head and did not move either. The court reporter's hands rested on the keys without pressing them. Somewhere outside the courtroom a door closed, and the sound of it carried through the wood paneling and faded out and left nothing behind it. Judge Whitcomb looked up. He looked at Marcus Brennan and he said, "Counsel, the note in your possession is dated April 17, 1989. The document Mrs. Latham declined to sign on March 14, 1989, was for a different amount, against the same property, on the same letterhead, with the same form number. Can you explain to this court how a borrower who refused to pledge collateral on March 14th signed a substantially larger pledge against the same collateral 34 days later, with no record of any intervening communication in either the bank's files or her own?" Marcus Brennan did not answer. Judge Whitcomb waited. Marcus Brennan said, "Your Honor, the bank's position is that the note speaks for itself." Judge Whitcomb said, "It does." He set his pen down. He found in Helen Latham's favor on every count. He declared the note void on grounds of likely fraudulent execution. He awarded Helen damages of $241,000. The principal claimed against her, plus 36 years of interest, plus legal fees, plus a sum specifically described in the order as compensation for the prolonged distress imposed upon a widow by an institution that should have known better. He referred the matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for further review of the bank's records, custody practices. The whole hearing took 51 minutes. Helen walked out of the federal courthouse in Chattanooga at 11:08 in the morning. Rebecca walked beside her. They did not speak in the parking garage. They did not speak on the drive back to Polk County. Rebecca drove. Helen sat in the passenger seat with the cedar trunk on the floor between her feet, the 14 ledger books inside it. The same 14 ledger books that had been sitting in a closet for 36 years, waiting for this particular day that nobody had known was coming. They got back to the house in the middle of the afternoon. Helen changed out of the blue dress and put on her work clothes. She made a pot of coffee. She and Rebecca took 2 cups out onto the back porch, and then they walked, together, down the slope behind the house toward the fence line at the edge of the national forest. They did not speak. The maples were bare. The wind was up. Rebecca, walking beside her mother on a piece of land she had grown up on but had never fully understood the cost of, looked over once and saw that Helen was looking straight ahead at the ridge where the property line met the forest, the way she had looked at it on the morning the letter came, and on 1,000 mornings before that. They walked to the fence. They stood there for a while. Rebecca finally asked the only question she had not asked in the courtroom or the car. "Mama, how did you know to start writing it down?" Helen looked at the ridge. She said, "Your father trusted people. I loved that about him. But after he was gone, somebody had to remember everything. So I did." They stood there a little longer. Then they turned and walked back up the slope toward the house. The sun was getting low and the air was getting colder, and Helen Latham, 69 years old, walked beside her daughter across a piece of land she had built from 40 acres into 320, one ledger book at a time, for 36 years, alone. She had known the bank was lying because she had been there. The diary was not evidence in the way the lawyers had used the word. It was something else. It was the record of a woman who had decided at 33 that she would never again be in a room with a man in a suit who was trying to take something from her without something written down to prove what had actually been said. She had kept that promise to herself for half her life. The 14 ledger books were not a legal document. They were the shape of a decision she had made on a Tuesday afternoon in March of 1989, alone in a kitchen with a 5-year-old daughter asleep in the next room, that she would never let it happen again. If you have watched this far, you are exactly the kind of person this channel is for. The kind who knows that quiet record-keeping outlasts every loud man in a suit. The next story is about an old farmer in West Virginia who kept a hand-drawn map his grandfather made in 1937, and what happened when a coal company tried to claim the mineral rights under his pasture. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll see you there.